Welcome to Women vs. Everything, a women's history podcast where we talk about badass women who overcame oppression in the face of adversity. Jess and I aren't historians, but what we lack in information, we make up for it in funny.
Hello. Yes, that was Grace. I'm Jess, and we are very happy to be here again for Season 1, Episode 5.
Yeah, we're on number 5 already.
So every episode, one of us chooses an individual to focus on and researches their story. The other focuses on researching the history and the culture and the context of the time. And then we sew it all together and hope it works. So, with Patreon now.
Ooh!
Yes, our Patreon has finally gone through all of the annoying moderation process. Sorry if anyone from Patreon is listening, we love you really. So we are at patreon.com/womenvseverything, and you can go there and sponsor us for as little as $1 a month, and everything helps us to keep doing what we're doing, buy fancy audio equipment, pay our wonderful editor, and just generally create awesome feminist media.
Absolutely. I also want to say I've made us a YouTube channel, so if you are someone that needs subtitles, you can go to our YouTube channel and switch on the subtitles and appreciate our wordiness from there, and I hope it understands my accent.
Amazing.
Send us our best subtitles glitches, maybe.
That could be a whole blooper reel in and of itself. YouTube subtitle fails.
Absolutely. And someone will be like, oh, surely this is a blooper. No, we actually did talk about cheese for half an hour.
I mean, that's just like an average Monday for me, but sure.
Have you seen that thing going around where it's an excerpt from a book which is like how to seduce a woman, and it says first offer her a square of cheese? And I was just like, yeah, that would work on Jess.
I have not seen that, but that is wonderful.
How has no one sent you that? Oh, I'll have to try and find it for you. It's like an old-timey book about, like, probably fucking Victorian dating or something, when they knew even less about how women worked. And I was just like... Yeah, we've had a few things going on. Jess, you've had some more exciting publications.
Yeah, I have. So I wrote an article about the Me Too movement and my PhD research for Metro, which came out last week. So that was exciting. And I have a couple of other fun things in the pipeline right now as well.
That's so exciting. Yeah. The most exciting thing from my week has been that I figured out that my last episode when we were talking about Stargate Atlantis, that it was actually a young Jason Momoa I was talking about fancying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense, to be fair.
Yeah, I didn't know at the time. I was just like, oh my god, who is this? What is this? This is like, I'm salivating. And
who is this beautiful human?
Oh, there's a party in my pants. And yeah, I still love Jason Momoa, and that's hilarious that it's like, oh my god, it goes all that far back, like we're star-crossed lovers, but, you know, it's creepier than that. Yeah, and one of my favourite Jason Momoa popular culture references is I saw something on Reddit where it was like a cartoonized version of him in Moana's dress, and it was Jason Moana, and I was just like, oh, just when you thought he couldn't get any hotter, I'm just like throwing some gender bending and...
Amazing. I have not seen that, but I felt like maybe I need to.
Maybe, okay, I'll try and find these two things we've talked about and put them on the Instagram episode comes out.
Yes, that would be good.
Yeah. This is a wonderful podcast where we tell you about, like, things on the internet you haven't seen yet. And then tell you about women you probably haven't heard of.
Yep. We have all of the things. We have historical women, we have bizarre internet culture, we have all of the things.
And we had our first kind of staff meeting of Women versus Everything. We all went on a Google Hangout, had a coffee, and made small talk.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was fun. You, me, Greg. It was Greg that remembered. It was Jason Momoa in Stargate Atlantis. And yeah, it was really fun, wasn't it?
It was really fun. We had a few tech fails, but once we got that sorted, it was great. I feel like Greg knows a lot more about me than I know about him at this point, because he's listened to many hours of my voice at this point. But yeah, it was lovely to actually meet him properly and get to know him a little bit.
Yeah, that was really nice. Actually, the tech fail was so funny because it was like, the tech fail was on my side because my internet just does not like anything. So it was kind of like the internet version of when you say you're going to meet two friends in a bar that don't know each other. and then you run late, and your two friends that have never met before are just sitting looking at each other and like, I hope they're getting on.
I don't know. Well, Greg is lovely. It was fine.
Yeah. I'd be like, I hope they're getting on, but not getting on so much they don't need me as a friend anymore.
We always need you, Grace.
Yay! I love attention.
In case anyone is coming into the podcast for the first time at this episode, Greg is our editor. Context.
Oh yeah. That's important context, I guess.
Yes.
I had another awkward Greg glitch. Greg glitch is the name of our corrections corner. And this isn't really a correction as much of a yes and. So my lovely cousin Louise Kay listened to our first episode about Emily Wilding Davison, and she said, oh, did you know that there was such a thing called the Steamboat Ladies? And these were women who had earned their degrees in either Oxford, Cambridge or Trinity. And Trinity College Dublin started awarding degrees to women like Emily Wilding Davison, who should have gotten them. And they only expected a handful of Irish women to apply, but for the 3 years they did it, 700 women applied and received degrees.
Wow.
Most of them were British and had to get the steamboat ferry from London to Dublin, hence the name.
That is amazing. I did not know that. That is super cool. Thank you so much for that addition to that story. That is wonderful.
That's Louise Kay, and she's Gealach Earrings on Instagram, Gealach. And she makes lovely jewellery as well. So, yeah, isn't that great? And you know what's even better is, like, I'm like, oh my god, Gen Z people listen to this.
Yeah, awesome.
She's my younger cousin. So, yeah, so thanks for yeeting that to us, Louise. I would give that 5 fortnights out of fortnights, I guess.
You're just saying words at this point.
That's the joke.
I'm old, I don't understand.
And I'm embracing the fact I'm old and don't know how to use these words.
Fair.
And then there's a proper Greg glitch corrections corner, which I found myself, is from looking up the Steamboat Ladies. I then found, do you remember I made a joke, like there was this paragraph on the suffragettes page, like, men were also involved in the suffragette movement.
Yes.
And it had no references, and I was just like, ha. Yeah, well, there is a whole Wikipedia page called the Men's League for Women's Suffrage. Yeah, so there you go.
Yeah, we like those men. This is how you ally.
Good. Allies. Yay! I think sometime we should do an episode on, like, good allies.
Yeah, we definitely should. Yeah. That would be a good... We could do that for one of our, like, special occasion episodes or something.
Yeah. International Men's Day.
Yes.
Yeah!
Which, before anyone asks, on International Women's Day in a few days, is on the 19th of November, although by the time we've released this, International Women's Day will be over. But still, International Men's Day is on the 19th of November.
Yeah, we were going to do an International Women's Day something, but it's just been a bit too close this year to when we just about got this podcast started. So watch this space for next year. We'll think up something badass.
Yes, we'll post some cool stuff on socials this year, and next year we will do a thing that might involve meeting up in person.
How is coronavirus fucking up your life this week? How is Corona life? I think that's a new thing.
I mean, Corona life is just like the last year, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know so many people have said this, but I genuinely can hardly believe that it's March again because I'm still processing last March. The time is weird and has no meaning anymore. COVID life is weird, and I'm bored and I'm fed up and I miss people and I want to go outside and do things. So yeah, that's how Corona life is treating me this week. How about you?
Oh, Corona life is no life. I hate it so much. Oh my god.
More like no Rona, am I right?
Yes. I can't even. Yeah, it's been great that we're doing this podcast in a way because it's like been something to do and something to keep focused on. And whenever I'm moaning to my friends about like, I feel so unproductive and can't get out of bed or don't see the point in it, they're like, you started a podcast.
Yes, you made a whole podcast.
Fair, which we celebrated 100 downloads this week.
Yay! Amazing!
100 new friends. Yay!
Woo! We love you all. You're all great. Please tell your friends and help us get to 200.
Yeah, I mean, we're already at 119. which is like amazing as well. It's just, I'm so happy.
Me too. This is so great. And we have people from all over the world. So hello to our international listeners. We see you. We love you.
Yeah, hello, one person in India and 2 people in like the Netherlands.
Yeah, and 2 people in Canada.
Irish, yes, and Irish people. So far, most of our listeners are English. So, you know, buck up. Don't let the English win.
Yeah, fair.
I'm like, if there's one way to get Irish people to do anything, it's tell them English people are doing it better than them. Yeah, so this week, Jess researched our lovely person, and yes. I researched the time period, and the time period was Austria 1750s to 1820s, and the themes Jess gave me to research was suppression of women's talent in favour of uplifting men, paternal, especially fatherly control, women being forced into the wife and mother role. So Jess, do you want to tell me and our lovely listeners what the name of the person that we're researching today is?
Yes. So I want to give credit to my friends Sam and Mary for suggesting this week's person, who I'd never heard of, but as soon as I started researching her, I knew that we had to do this story. I feel fairly confident in saying that everyone who's listening to the show will have heard of her brother, but the person that we are talking about today is Maria Anna Mozart.
I guessed that in my research.
I wondered if you might.
Yeah, and can I just say, I'm a bit of an expert on this topic, because I have seen the Simpsons episode where they tell this story.
There's a Simpsons episode? Tell me more.
Yeah, there is, where Bart's Mozart and Lisa is Anna Maria. So, yeah, that's all I have to offer. That's my research.
We will link to that episode in the show notes if we can find it. I'm sure it's on a streaming service somewhere.
Yeah, Disney Plus has all the Simpsons episodes at the moment.
Amazing.
Yeah, so the background for this was really, really hard to research. And let me tell you why. There's very little about women in that time. There's very little about people who weren't rich. There's very little... When you look at the history of Austria, and my sources are... YouTube was really helpful. I found a bunch of YouTube documentaries and lectures, which I'll put in the show notes.
Oh, amazing.
And Wikipedia. So look, it's not like I read a book. I'm sure in a book somewhere all this information is, but that's, you know, listen to another podcast if you want books. So when I researched like Austria and this time and these centuries, I kind of just got lots of stories about the war and their royal family and nobility, like what's the life of a peasant living in this time like, and I would get nothing.
Yeah.
So there's that real, you know, history is written from the top, you know, the perspective of the winners, in that, like, I could only get information about quite wealthy women. And I could only get information about women that were, like, born into power and wealth. But, I mean, there was this other very cool woman around those times. So the monarchy at the time was the Habsburg Empire. And interestingly, this is the family where the Habsburg jaw came from, which is the mandibular prognathism, which is, have you seen those kind of medieval paintings of royalty and they have these huge jaws?
Maybe? I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. You obviously don't hang around on creepy Wikipedia as much as I do. Yeah, the Habsburg jaw is like deformation of the jaw caused by inbreeding. Yeah, so there was...
Interesting.
Repeated familial marriage to keep land and prestige, and the most famous people who are painted with the Habsburg jaw were, like, still a century before all this, but, like, I just thought that was really interesting. Like, Austria was in a flourish of culture, Vienna became the centre of Europe, but it was also, like, surrounded by enemies because Austria owned lots of European territories, like bits of Hungary, Italy, Belgium, German-speaking Austria, and Slavic provinces. But then across the years we're discussing, 1750s to 1820s, it lost some of those territories. It was a time of upper-class intellectualism, philosophy. It was during the Age of Enlightenment, so, like, Isaac Newton was knocking around. There was lots of technological advancements. But for every advancement that was made in these areas, there was lots of exploited and displaced workers, and life becoming more urban and industrial without adequate adaptations in sanitation and health and quality of life to deal with that. So, terrible time to not be born into wealth and prestige. Terrible time to be a woman. The legal position of women in Austria kind of only started improving since the middle of the 1970s. So we're talking like 200 years before that. And, you know, Wikipedia said this, so Austrians, you know, feel free to disagree. But it just said, like, Austria is still largely a traditional gender roles country, and it has a lot of influence from the Catholic Church, my good friend. The first attempts to improve political participation by women were made in the Revolution of 1848 by the Wiener Demokratischer Verein, but the association was short-lived. So when Maria Anna was born, 1750, she was born into a time where there was this great role model walking around, Maria Theresa Habsburg, and she was the mother of Marie Antoinette. And she was
who also features briefly in our story later.
Ooh, exciting! So she was, one of the great monarchs of the 18th century, and her and her son who inherited the next role as emperor, Joseph II. They both have quite amazing legacies as being very forward-thinking. But Maria had to, like, co-empress with her husband Francis, and then her son after her husband died. When her father died, there was this thing called a pragmatic sanction, and she was only 20 years old, and the pragmatic sanction was that if there was no male heirs, she could be empress. But Prussia, who was, like, enemies with Austria, and then were always fighting over land, Prussia's Frederick the Great, he spent, like, the first year in power in the War of Austrian Succession. So there was a war started by Frederick the Great about, like, that Maria Theresa should not inherit the throne, basically. And her diary says, I found myself without money, without credit, without experience, without knowledge, and without any counsel. So the poor thing, she was thrown into the deep end. And that even though she had this pragmatic sanction, the fact she says she was without any counsel suggests that maybe, you know, it still was not popular that she had inherited this power. She was co-empress, but she effectively did all the reigning with her husband. And they founded a dynasty, Habsburg-Lorraine. There was massive reforms in her time. She had 16 kids, only of whom 6 daughters lived to adulthood. And they think it was because of that, you know, she was a more humane, practically driven and, like, life-aware, common-sense ruler. So there was... The Age of Enlightenment was lots of, like, driven by philosophy and deep thinking and reflecting, and she was quite much more practical. But there was still this callousness, and again, this theme of, like, you know, the daughters being used as political pawns, you know, being sent off to marry the allies, and stuff like that, you know. Yeah, there was lots of wars. Between 1740 to 1779, the country was mostly at war, so I think that would have impacted the economy and the general state of ease in the country. Everyone was fighting about this place, Silesia, which it lost to the Prussians, and it was like Austria's richest and most industrialized province. So they lost a major centre during that time as well. Yeah, Maria Theresa built one of the best medical centres in Europe. She brought inoculation against smallpox and made it available to all children, including peasant children. Sadly, she died of smallpox herself, but she made huge financial and educational reforms, including taxing the nobility for the first time.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Centralization. So like I said, Austria had regions in all these different countries, and then all those different countries spoke different languages and had their own cultures, and the laws then were kind of made by the nobility in the area at the time. So she did some work towards centralization that was then continued by her son more so. But she passed law that children of all genders, aged 6 to 12, should achieve mandatory schooling. And this was 100 years before that law was passed in England.
Wow. So that's surprisingly progressive for its time then.
Yeah. She also made some decisions about separating church and state, got teacher training schools. Yeah, and that was unpopular. Sending children to mandatory school was unpopular.
I bet it was.
Yeah, people saw children as labour at the time. But she ordered the arrest of everyone who was opposed, so I kind of love her.
Wow, well then. She was like, no, it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like all these things, they take time. Like, into the 19th century, half the population of Austria was still illiterate, so...
Really?
But, you know, she did everything she could, you know. Yeah, and she brought learning into the vernacular language, so, like, did away with Latin as the language of education, and she replaced rote learning and blind obedience with reasoning, which had, like, a really profound effect on the relationship between people and state. She made specific measures that included abolition of torture and witch burning. She really was about protecting the integrity of the state. So there was widespread problems because of war around famine, unrest and abuse, landlord-peasant reforms. Yeah, and she was a pious Catholic herself. So even though at first there was persecution of the Jesuits at the time, and even though at first she was into that and kind of sacked everyone from institutions of monarchy that were Jesuits, she still brought about increasing secularization of culture. She abandoned efforts of converting Jews and Protestants to Catholicism. In 1748, she relented the expulsion of Jewish people under pressure, and in later years then took some measures to protect the Jewish population. So when her son Joseph became co-emperor with her, he was even more progressive, to the point that they actually clashed a little bit because he wanted to achieve a lot a bit too quickly, is the one kind of consistent criticism of him. She died in 1780 from smallpox, ironically and sadly, which is what she supported the inoculation for. So yeah, that's till 1780 that this woman is the empress and she's running the country. So one would hope there might be some scope and freedom for other women to come into power. So what was Maria Anna's years like up until that point?
Yeah, so that's really interesting, all of that stuff about this, actually for the time, incredibly progressive female ruler, because actually so much of this story is, unfortunately, is centred on very strict gender roles, patriarchal norms, suppression of women being allowed to do things that men were allowed to do. So she was the fourth of 7 children, but only 2, which was her and, of course, her brother Wolfgang. They were the only 2 who survived to adulthood. And her father, Leopold, was German, and he was a composer, a conductor, a music teacher, and a violinist. And he was the music teacher for both of the children. So when she was 7, he started teaching her how to play the harpsichord. And by all accounts, she was an incredibly talented player, and she was incredibly proficient by the time she was about 11. This was kind of the backdrop to this. Obviously, very, musical family, very talented family, but not particularly wealthy family. They were described in the research I found as middle class, so not living in poverty, but certainly not among the wealthy nobility of the time, who, as you were saying, most of the information about the time seems to be about. Yeah, so she was born in 1751. She was older than her brother by 5 years, and by all accounts was at least as talented, and some people say possibly even more so.
Wow. But
didn't get the same opportunities beyond childhood, as we will see, and I've written in my notes, because of the goddamn patriarchy. So yeah. So the story really gets interesting around 1762, when she would have been 11 years old. And her father took the entire family to Vienna. They went to Vienna on a trip that lasted for about 3 months. And in that time, they had secured invitations for the children to play for several wealthy and notable patrons, essentially. They were playing at the palace of somebody called Count Colalto within 3 days of arriving. And one person who was there was Karl von Zinzendorf, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who at the time was the Viennese Treasury Councillor and was future Prime Minister. He wrote in his diary about seeing these 2 incredibly talented children perform. One of the things that he wrote was, "The little child from Salzburg and his sister played the harpsichord. The poor little fellow plays marvellously. He is a child of spirit, lively, charming. His sister's playing is masterly, and he applauded her.
Wow, masterly.
So,
and,
right.
like, poor little fellow, that's interesting as well.
Yeah. I mean, he was only, like, 7 at this time, so these were, you know, quite young kids, but obviously showing this incredible talent very, very early on. And you mentioned at the beginning, you were talking about the Empress Maria Theresa, and they were actually invited to the royal court to play for her. And one of the things that she did while they were there was she tested Wolfgang's ability by requiring him to play with the keyboard covered.
Oh my god. Oh, so that he couldn't see his hands, is it?
Yeah, it seems that way, yeah. Which I thought was really interesting. It's like, okay, that's an interesting thing to do, but sure. So clearly, like, very, very, very early on in life, they were meeting these incredibly powerful, incredibly influential people. And we mentioned at the beginning that Marie Antoinette was going to feature briefly in this story. So they met her during their visit to the court. And there's an anecdote in the Mozart biography by Eric Blom. Not sure how true this is, but anyway, anecdotally, that Marie Antoinette, or Maria Antonia as she was known at the time, she helped Wolfgang when he slipped on the polished floor, and it reads, she is supposed to have received a proposal of marriage in return. Which I thought was really funny. Obviously it didn't work out.
I mean...
Yep.
Just going back to that, like, it's so interesting, you know, it's like now when we go to music recitals and stuff like that, there's a reverence, you know, to the people who are playing, and there's, like, this respect, and you listen and you applaud. And that, like, oh, cover his hands and see if he can do it again is a little bit more like, I don't know, like he was a toy or a show pony kind of thing, like a circus act.
Yeah, and that's,
you know?
really what seems to be a theme of all of this. It seems that really the family, the father in particular, was very much like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like they weren't okay with it. It seems like they were pretty happy with all of this, but it does seem a bit, yeah, like his whole thing was showing them off and saying, look what my amazing kids can do.
Which I think was appropriate to the time because, like I just said, children were considered labour, you know?
Yeah.
For a lot of history, children have been considered, like, you know, there's been a lot of objectification of children, that they've been considered, you know, something that you can get more resources from, or that it's like someone to take care of you in your old age, or there's been, you know, this, like, not quite a consideration or understanding of children as separate beings, you know, with their own psyche.
Yeah, absolutely. And they did very well out of it. So apparently in this time they were in Vienna, in the first week, their father was able to send home the equivalent of about 2 years' salary.
Nice.
So yeah, they cashed in on this. They made a lot of money out of this. And this trip to Vienna led to a family tour. They spent 3 years, the family touring around Western Europe together and playing and performing and meeting various influential and important people. And a big part of this was sort of, again, showing off these, child prodigies, essentially, these incredibly talented, very, very young children. And in the early days, it was often Maria Anna who got the top billing. It was her name first that people were coming to see, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little unclear where that changed. I mean, she was the older of the two, clearly, so that might have been why to a certain extent. But it's a little unclear where that changed. But to begin with, at least, she was, you know, she was the big name. Granny
Mac, and I think, you know, I'm just like, oh, she's been so erased from history, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I was so desperate for information on women from that time that I just even tried, like, famous Austrian women from this period, which is how I came across Maria Anna's name and the dates matched up. But, like, you know, in this pre-1800s, I got, like, 3 from this time period, you know.
Oh, really? Wow.
And they were all already born into some sort of service to the monarchy. But, like, one was Maria Anna Fesemer, a Salzburg court singer, Mariana Auenbrugger, a pianist and composer, where her dad was a pharmacist, so it was quite well to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1786, this person might come up, Barbara Kraft Vienna. she exhibited her first painting at the Academy of Fine Arts, but her most famous painting is a portrait of Mozart.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And her dad was an imperial court painter already, so he had the connections, you know. So it seems like the arts, you know, and performing was somewhere that women were welcomed if they were born into the right connections already, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. At least to a certain extent. Yeah. So this giant tour of Europe continued, and they went to all kinds of different places. They went to Munich, Frankfurt, Brussels, Paris. Stayed in Paris for 5 months. Stayed in London for about a year. And then they went to the Netherlands, but at that point things were kind of interrupted by illness. So Maria Anna, who was also nicknamed Nan Earl, and is referred to by that name in a lot of the information that I could find, just a nickname that she had. I couldn't find out why or where it came from. So they arrived in The Hague, and she developed a severe cold, which meant that she wasn't able to go ahead with some of the performances that they got planned. There was one concert where it's a little unclear whether or not it actually took place without her. One of the biographers believes that it might have been postponed. But either way, her cold turned into typhoid fever, which is pretty serious.
Yeah.
Got steadily worse. On the 21st of October that year, she was given the last sacrament. Which is something that's generally done at the point that someone is believed to be dying or close to death. But she got a visit from the royal physician, who gave her different treatment and turned things around. And she survived and she recovered. And by the end of that month, she was doing somewhat better. So they started travelling home, incorporated a second stop into Paris, went to Switzerland as well, eventually returned to Salzburg in Austria in November of 1766. It's a little unclear from the information at which point this was, but there's a quote from a German diplomat named Baron von Grimm, who described her as having, quote, the finest and most brilliant execution on the harpsichord, and said that, quote, no one but her brother can rob her of supremacy.
Oh, interesting.
Which is like, that's very high praise, but also very harsh.
Yeah, it's like already this thing of pitting them against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, interestingly, it seems like it didn't really impact their relationship that much. It seems as if they actually had a very supportive sibling relationship.
Oh.
By all accounts, yeah, it seems like at least in childhood and adolescence they were very close, which is really nice actually. So when they finished this tour, supposedly they made a lot of money from it. No one really knows for sure quite to what extent that's true. But their father returned to his previous job, which was working for the Prince Archbishop as the Kapellmeister is the word, which is head of music making.
Wow. Okay. We see again, they were born into a family with the connections.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he went back to work in that role. The family stayed where they were in the cramped small apartment that they'd been living in. So they didn't move or anything, which is part of what's led people to think that maybe the financial impact of the tour wasn't as great as some others think. But by the following year, they were on the move again. They went back to Vienna and stayed there for a couple of years, apart from an enforced evacuation due to a smallpox epidemic. But then, around this time, Maria Anna was turning 18, and that meant that essentially her music career had to pretty much end at that point. So, right, it's really sad. So, that's one of the resources I found said that she was no longer exhibitable as a child wonder because she was not a child anymore. But it also seems as though there were some very strict societal views at the time, which her parents ultimately shared, around what was appropriate for women to do, essentially what was appropriate for girls to do. And you mentioned earlier about how it seems like the arts was one of those few spaces where women could carve out a space for themselves. And in all these years. Yeah.
I think that says a lot. Famous women in history from this country in this time period, those 3,
Yeah. It is still really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And it seems as though the general societal view at the time was that it was fine for a little girl, for a child, to perform music and to appear on stage and to travel, essentially. But for a woman to do it would be considered scandalous.
Oh my God.
And the family, and Leopold, her father in particular, didn't want to risk ruining the reputation of himself and his son.
Yeah, there's a few things cropping up here that are reminding me of stuff that still happens with child prodigies or child fame today.
Oh, interesting.
Like, where did the money go? Yeah, the kids are working, they're on these massive tours, there's evidence that there was money there, where did the money go, what is dad doing on tour, and this kind of like shunning once their usefulness has ended, the cuteness has ended, then it's like, it's no longer about what makes you happy, which might have been the selling point all along.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem as though the child prodigy angle was really what they were going for.
And it's about the brand, like the dad didn't want the brand to be tainted by...
Exactly.
A wild woman coming in and ruining everything with her piano.
Right. And for her to carry on professionally after she was 18 would have been, as I said, would have been considered scandalous, would have brought, potentially brought this, judgment on the whole family, and they just didn't want to do that, didn't want to risk that. So pretty much after the point that she turned 18, when she was considered of marriageable age, she stopped touring, she stopped performing, she stopped getting paid for music of any kind, really. But there's no record that she complained about it or had a real problem with it. It seems as it's something that came up again and again in my research of her, but it seems like she was just so obedient to her father. She was just like absolutely just completely bent to his will on everything as far as we could tell. One resource I found said that had she fought her father on this issue, the scandal would have been devastating for the family. So the girl whose life had been led by music and travel stopped performing and did as she was told.
Oh my God, imagine, you've all this money, all this kind of relatively quite luxurious life and travelling and seeing the world and having your horizons broadened, and then all this gone, like the applause alone,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God.
And just because now you're an adult, so now you're I'm just trying to imagine what it would have been like to have your whole life defined by this this career and this talent and this thing that you do, and then suddenly, bam, you're 18, you're ready to be married off, that's all done, and overnight essentially it's just gone.
Yeah, and you've no agency. Because I'm like, a part of me is thinking okay, I'm just over empathizing here and being in her shoes and okay, what can I do? I could say, okay, I wanna be married to someone who travels, that we're gonna still have traveling and excitement. Maybe I can find a husband who's forward thinking enough that I can still do performances or something. But you just didn't get a say to even put in that much for a preference for who you'd like,
No, absolutely. And it's very clear that in some ways the family was very close, and she obviously loved her father a great deal, loved her brother a great deal, and this idea that it would have been so scandalous and so harmful to them that it almost just had her backed into a corner, that she didn't, as you said, had no agency, there wasn't really anything that she could have done about it, which is so sad. And she did carry on playing music, but privately. She never really performed publicly again, and certainly never made money from music again.
Jesus.
And didn't even get to marry the person she wanted. So she fell in love with a man called Franz Diepold. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was a captain and a private tutor. But she turned down his marriage proposal. Some people think that was her father's influence. That some other sources say that that's only a theory. It's not known for sure why they didn't marry. But honestly, given how controlling her father clearly was, that seems like a likely explanation to me. So she eventually married a magistrate, Johann Baptist Franz von Berchtold zu Sonnenberg.
Oh my
Long
god.
name. Yes.
I'm bored just listening to his name.
So she married him, Berchtold, in 1783 when she was 32, which for the time was pretty late for a woman to get married. I mean, very, very late, really, for a woman to get married in her 30s in the 1700s. Her husband was a widower and had 5 children from his 2 previous marriages, who she helped to raise.
Oh, gross.
And she had her first child in 1785 when she'd have been 34. Again, very, very late for a woman to be having her first child in the 1700s, in her mid-30s. She named her son Leopold after her father. And what's really interesting about this is that she went back to Salzburg. She was living with her husband in a village about 30 kilometres out of Salzburg. She went back to Salzburg to give birth. When she moved home to her husband, she left her infant son with her father.
How strange.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's a letter from her father that's been found in which he states that he would prefer to raise the child for the first few months himself, but doesn't say why. And in the end, he pretty much continued to care for his grandson, including everything from teaching him to speak to even starting musical training with him very, very early on, for about the first 2 years of the child's life. And the child only went back to Maria Anna and her husband when her father died.
Oh, there's something about that is massively squicking me out.
It's really strange, isn't it? So there's a few kind of biographers have different thoughts on this arrangement. So the son was ill when he was very little and thought that maybe he needed to be kept in Salzburg so he'd have better access to medical care. But that doesn't explain why he was still kept there after he recovered. Another possibility that's suggested is that Maria Anna had to take care of her own health, which was not great at the time, or she had to take care of her stepchildren. But another biographer has suggested that it's because her father wanted to essentially train another musical genius.
Yeah.
As he had done with her and with her brother. And that biographer suggests that giving up her son was really a sign of just how completely subordinate she was to her father's wishes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. And also, again, really sad. It's like how powerless you must feel as a mother in that situation for an older, powerful man to say, I want to take care of your kid for, the first few months, which turned into 2 years, and not really feel like you can say no.
Yeah, it feels a bit like, oh my god, like, was she brainwashed? Was her father abusive? And then it's just like, maybe all women were just brainwashed by the abusive, culture at the time towards women. To have no agency like that is horrific, really traumatic.
Yeah, it just seems as though that was the norm. Women had no real agency, and there was these societal expectations were so strong.
Yeah, I know I've read in history, like, a lot that, like, it would be very normal for people to have children, and, if you can't afford them, or if you already have a lot of children, they get sent to live with other relatives, know. So, I mean, it could be that. It could have been that it was an agreement that suited everyone for this kid to go and live with the dad. But yeah, it's very sad. Still very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really strange, isn't it? And you have to sort of hope that it was an arrangement that suited everyone. But it seems as though there's at least some theories that maybe she wasn't really okay with it, but didn't feel like she could say no to it.
And even if it was a situation where it was okay with everyone, like that just wreaks havoc on children's attachments,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's kids not being seen as within their own agency, or, having their own, the same as women, not being seen as within their own agency, or having their own neurological system and hopes and dreams and psyche, and that they can be used like pawns or like objects, like, I think the room would look better with this in that corner. Like, I think life would be better if this happened to my daughter, so let's just go do that,
Yeah, absolutely. Not really being treated as people, I suppose, being treated as property, which in many cultures women have been throughout history.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and throughout all of this, she's watching her brother's career take off and him get this incredible level of recognition and success that, of course, he doesn't have to stop when he's 18.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, it seems as though he was very supportive of her in a lot of ways, but obviously, again, she was really completely beholden to her father's will and the norms for women at the time. I found a bit about, so she composed music as well, but none of her work has survived, which is really sad.
Oh, that's so sad. I was going to ask that, because I think I'd heard that, that she continued to write music, but it's all gone.
Yeah, she did, and she when she was 19, she sent one of her compositions to Wolfgang, who was off on tour at the time, and he wrote back to her with a letter that is quoted as saying, "My dear sister, I am in awe that you can compose so well. In a word, the song you wrote is beautiful, but the song hasn't survived." She apparently copied down some of his compositions when he was very young, when he was too young to write them down. So it's possible that some of the work that is attributed to him was actually hers. But there's no clear evidence for how big her contribution was, or whether anything has survived of hers. But there's certainly nothing that is definitively hers has survived.
Yeah, or you can speculate that, if she was sending him pieces that, he could have performed them and said they were his,
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that, could have happened. So, she suffered then 2 bereavements 10 years apart. So, her brother died in 1791. He was only 35 at the time. And there's a lot of speculation around kind of exactly what happened and around his death. And then her husband died in 1801 when she was 50. And after that point, she returned to Salzburg with her 2 children and 4 of her stepchildren, and she worked to support herself as a music teacher.
How interesting. So if you have to work to support yourself, that's okay.
It seems as though teaching is okay, but performing is not.
And do you know what kind of class they would have been in at that point?
Do you mean like socioeconomically?
Yeah.
So it's a little unclear at that point, but there is an interesting quote from an author named Mary Novello, who it seems was a friend who visited her in 1829, shortly before she died, and believed that she was impoverished because of the way she was living, but actually it seems as though she was just living frugally and left a large fortune behind.
Yeah, I ask because, again, it's that reoccurring, we're 5 episodes in, so we can talk like experts now, but that reoccurring theme we see of, like, single mothers, including widows, being, really in the bottom rung of the societal socioeconomic ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And I'm assuming that based on the fact that she had to return to work to support herself, probably wasn't doing amazingly well financially at this point, at least, and 6 children to look after as well. Her 2 children and 4 stepchildren.
Yeah, and they're, when we talked about, like, Emily Wilding Davison, which was sometime later, but there was this thing of, like, single mothers being in the most ill health as well, because they would, a bit like she's done with her financial sacrifices, they would be the most malnourished and everything else because they would be just so focused on providing for their kids.
Yeah. So when she was much older, she connected again with her brother's widow, and apparently she hadn't even known. Constanza was her name, and apparently she hadn't even known that she was still alive. And when they met each other, they were cordial. It's described as cordial but not warm. But Maria Anna lent her sister-in-law a collection of family letters, including lots of correspondence between her and her brother and their father, up to the 1780s, and that was a huge part of kind of preserving his legacy and really continuing to build his fame after his death.
Wow.
Still you know, almost being in the shadows and in the background herself for most of her life as soon as she came into adulthood, but still, you know, working to uplift her brother's reputation and fame after his death.
Yeah. Oh, because I know some popular, like I mentioned the Simpsons episode earlier, some popular dramatizations of this story show that there was like a rivalry between them, and that she was driven insane by the rivalry. But that's not the true story at all. You know.
No, it really doesn't seem like there's any evidence to suggest that it was like that at all, which is interesting. Because in many ways you would think, well, I wouldn't be surprised if there was. It would make sense for there to be that rivalry thing going on, but it just seems like there really wasn't.
But I think again, if she's so gaslighted into submission by society and her father and everything else, it's, you know, emotionally it might not have been an option to go there, like to tap into that level of anger and grief.
Yeah. So the end of the story is that her health declined in her last few years. She went blind in 1925, which was 4 years before she died. And again, as I mentioned, this friend Mary Novello, who she visited, and she described her as blind, languid, exhausted, feeble, and nearly speechless, as well as lonely. But she also said, as I said, that she also assumed that she was in poverty when it seems that actually she wasn't. She died on 29th of October 1829, and she was 78 years old. So that is today's story. And one of the sources that I used actually that was really interesting was a bunch of material from a playwright called Sylvia Milo, who wrote a one-woman play called The Other Mozart that opened in 2015. And she has been telling this story through that play, which is really, really interesting. Other sources were Wikipedia, of course, our old friend, History Answers, Huffpost, the Digital Humanities Institute at the University of Sheffield, OpenCulture, and Womenshistory.info, and I will share all of those links in the show notes, which you can access by supporting us on Patreon.
Yes.
Yeah, so there we are. That is today's story.
Well done, Maria Anna. That's, fantastic. Good job. It makes me think of two things, like, you know, the work Jamila Jamil is doing on like societal gaslighting of women in power and women who are celebrities, and
yes,
you know, on a similar level of how much you can believe that is fact, you know, like we're talking about, you know, that we have no evidence of her resenting her brother and stuff, but, you know, if you're getting those messages from everywhere that this is just something you can't do, and it's just women just do not and cannot do it, then you start to believe that's the truth and stop fighting back, you know?
Yeah, there was actually there was actually a quote about that I didn't get to. That says women were still being thought of as less than, and that they should keep their place in the home taking care of the family. There was even discussion of whether or not a woman could create. So it's like there's this debate about, are women even capable of this, even when women are literally out there doing the thing, and people are still going, oh, but are women really capable of this? And I think in different ways that still happens.
Yeah, definitely. So that then the women that did were seen as the freaks, and they were, you know, burned as a witch or locked up in the asylum, or
just shunned and treated as a pariah by their society. Yeah,
I was just gonna say that because, you know, having grown up in a very Catholic country myself, that power of shame that is utilized and exclusion and expulsion is like haunts Catholics. You know, it's still a huge part of Catholic guilt, you know, that you're just going to get so heavily rejected from society that you're not going to survive it, you know. And it might have been
if you break the rules. Yeah,
and it might have been that. It might have been like, if she persisted with this and was like, all right, I'm going to go do my, you know, composer thing or whatever, that like her dad might have been in fear of losing his job. It might have tarnished her brother's fame and reputation. You know, it might have been actually harmful for the family, because of how, when shame is used as a weapon, we're taught to utilize it for people that don't fit in.
Yep. Totally. All of that.
And it also made me think of, I don't know if you've seen the documentary about Britney Spears.
I have not, but I feel like I should because I keep hearing things about it. I feel like it would probably make me angry though, because the way she's been treated is just horrendous.
Yeah, it's again that theme of like, who is controlling the public narrative and who is gaining from that narrative and who is being kept silent from that narrative and being damaged by that narrative. And, you know, the way we can still objectify celebrities and like talk about them like they're a pet, like, oh, I preferred them when their hair was this way, or, you know, like without care for like, yeah, there's a real human being with a whole reality behind that statement, and how shame and control are still being used today in gifted women, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to hear a hometown heroine?
Oh my god, I so do. Yes.
Yeah.
Please tell me about your hometown heroine.
To cheer us up.
Yes.
So thanks to my cousin Louise and Sophie K, who contacted us on Instagram, and there's also womenvseverything@gmail.com. So yeah, Sophie K, our friend from Oxford.
Love her. Hey, Sophie.
Hi, Sophie. We love you. So she nominated Ozark, which is the Oxfordshire Sexual Abuse and Rape Crisis Centre. So in case you missed it, Jess and I, even though we're talking today from Cork in Ireland and Leicestershire?
Yes, that one.
Oh, and Leicestershire. We met originally in Oxford in England. So Sophie K is our lovely friend there, and her username on Instagram is Disco Cactus.
Which is just the best username.
Disco_cactus. So the Oxfordshire Sexual Abuse and Rape Crisis Centre, we work within Oxfordshire providing feminist, free, trauma-informed counselling, online and helpline support, as well as help within the process of reporting to the criminal justice system. We support our survivors by being non-judgmental, non-directive, free, and we challenge discrimination where possible. We offer consent workshops within schools, as well as cross-organisational training on supporting survivors of sexual violence. We are a grassroots charity of committed, smart and amazing women, and I want to shout my gratitude and awe for them from the rooftops.
Yes. Yay, Ozark. We love them. And we will pop the donation link in our link tree, so if people want to go and check them out and support them, then they can do that.
Follow them at Oxfordshire Rape Crisis and at C_project_ for more info. Those are Instagram names.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's put them on our link tree. That sounds great.
Yeah, definitely. So people can support them if they want to, which you totally should, because they are great.
Absolutely. Really important work. I'm sad.
Yes.
Work that I'm sad has to exist, but really glad it's there.
Oh, I know. I mean, I wish we could be in a world where it wasn't needed, and maybe someday we'll get there. But yeah, at least right now I'm glad there's people out there doing the work that's needed.
Completely. So yeah, do you have anything for the basic bitch gratitude list?
I feel like I probably should add something to that. Yeah, there must be things. My week has not been that bad. What am I grateful for this week? Coffee, as always. No, well, yes, I'm grateful for coffee. No, I am grateful this week for the support of other people in the journalism community. Particularly, I'm in this like small group chat on Twitter, just with a few other journos, and we share experiences and we support each other, and it's just really nice, and it really helps in what is, you know, freelance life is fundamentally quite lonely, so it helps with that, I think. So I'm grateful for that group this week. And I feel like I've said this before, but again, I am eternally grateful for the existence of vaccines and the NHS and all of these things. So yeah, quite a few of my family members and friends have had their vaccines at this point, and it's just reassuring to watch things slowly getting less awful.
Absolutely. Have you seen Dolly Parton getting her vaccine?
I have, yes.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, that was great.
If it's good enough for Dolly Parton, get in on it.
We should have that on a t-shirt.
Dolly says, get your vaccines.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. What about you? What are you grateful for this week?
Jason Momoa.
I mean, fair.
I am really grateful for... This is quite neat. Neither you or Greg seem to be as excited about this, but I love the bacon pancakes parrot.
I got the gist of it from our last call. I haven't actually watched it yet, I must admit, but do you want to explain to the listeners what Bacon Pancakes Parrot is?
I sent you 2 links and you didn't click on either of them.
I was going to.
Yeah, it's this parrot called Tiki, and it's at Flock Party on TikTok, where I hang out with my Gen Z homies, and it's just so cute. That's not the original Bacon Pancakes parrot. On YouTube there is one, and it can sing like the whole song, which is just, yeah. I love those, but I'm really glad I don't actually own a parrot, because they're so noisy and I am incredibly sound sensitive, so...
They are super loud.
Yeah, she was like, for every cute video I put up, there's all these bits I edit out of it where it's just like squawking, and I'm like, oh. What else am I grateful for? To know.
I mean, I feel like Jason Momoa and Pancake Parrot is probably a good set of gratitude. As gratitude in the COVID times goes, it's not bad.
I mean, look, I found something. I found something to say.
Yeah, okay. So do we have anything, or shall we let our lovely listeners get back to their days?
Just thank you so much for tuning in.
We love
really
you.
Grateful. Yeah, thank you for your attentions. They're so good. Yeah, and interact with us. Women versus Everything, that's BS Everything, on Instagram and at gmail.com. And WV Everything Pod on Twitter. Interact with us. Send us your hometown heroines. Send us any Greg glitches, like corrections, follow-ups you want to do. And send us your basic bitch gratitude list. We want to hear about life from you. And
yes.
Also, yeah, feel free to send us your hometown heroines, because we might actually just make a full episode of them, like Jess did this week.
Oh, we definitely should. And send us money on Patreon. Patreon.com/women vs everything.
Yeah. We now have a working Patreon, and yeah, Jess and I have so far invested our own money into making this podcast, and we would love to get some return, and to, as femmes in this world, and as a disabled femme, I would love to make money back out of my creative endeavours and our mental load that we're carrying in doing this, because the stories fucking suck.
Yeah.
It was pretty bad to be a woman, like, all the time. So send us money. If you don't have money, then send us hometown heroines and basic bitch gratitude lists to cheer us up.
Yes, and share the podcast with your friends on social media.
My God, totally share the podcast with your friends. If you have no friends, then...
Make some and share the podcast with them.
Listen, if you have no friends, we're your friends.
Yes.
Send us money. Oh, that
the silliness and the irreverence is part of all of this, right?
Absolutely. No, I'm just like, I think it's like really relieving when the stories are so like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good description of the patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, the stories aren't so bad, but the patriarchy fucking sucks.
Yeah. And definitely laughing about all the fucked upness is a trauma response, 100%.
Oh, totally. There's, like, honestly, there's so much truth about myself and the world I would have never admitted to or spoken if I hadn't been able to joke about it. You know? Like that thing when you go to a comedy show and it's like they tell a joke and you're like, that's actually a fair fucking point. You know?
It's like, yeah, well said, fair.
It's like, I'm not even laughing, I'm impressed.
Oh, God. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. Take care.
Bye! Right.
Okay.
I have got another call in 15 minutes and I need to go and,
Go on,
very, very quickly shove some food in my face.
Talk to you soon. Click my parrot links.
I will go and do that.
Bye.
Bye!